Okay, all right. So it is noon. I will welcome everyone, and I'm sure we'll have a few more pop on. I am Ellen Hahn, and I direct the UK Center for Appalachian Research and Environmental Sciences. I see many of our members on the call. I see some names I do not recognize, but we are so excited to welcome Dr. Petros Koutrakis from Harvard with us today. And before I introduce him, I just want to remind folks to mark their calendars. I'll do it now and then at the end. If you're a member of UK Cares or want to join or just don't want to join us, we have our State of the Center Science meeting on December 12th. It will be totally virtual again. Hopefully next year it'll be in person. So stay tuned for that information. So let me, without further ado, let me introduce Dr. Koutrakis. Just give me a second. And so Dr. Koutrakis is, as I mentioned, at the Harvard University, and he's the head of Exposure, Epidemiology, and Risk Program, and the director of the EPA Harvard University Center for Ambient Particle Health Effects. Dr. Koutrakis is a member of the national and international committees, many of them, and the past technical editor-in-chief of the Journal of Air and Waste Management Association. He has published over 170 peer-reviewed papers in the areas of air quality, exposure, and health effects assessment and instrumentation. And as many of you know, we do have a radon risk reduction research program through Breathe here at UK. It's I happen to head that up, and so I have been wanting to have Dr. Koutrakis join us for many months, and he said yes. So I'm so excited. I will turn it over to him just to remind everyone that we'll put everyone on mute and to turn off your cameras while Dr. Koutrakis is speaking. And at the end, we will have time for questions. So please put your questions in the chat. Anything I forgot, Kara? I don't think so. Okay, thank you. Petros, it's all yours.
Thank you so much. I guess the brief bio you read there, probably it's about 20 years old. I'm not a director of the Exposure Epidemiology Research Program and Risk Program, and also I'm an author of 500 papers. So this probably was when I was 40. So next time I will provide you more update. Also, I always like to go to Kentucky, so unfortunately we are still on Zooms, but I hope to collaborate with you and other people there, because I think radon is a serious problem, and I guess you get a lot of radon there. So we started this research about 5 years ago. And this was kind of serendipitous. We always wanted to know what really makes particles toxic. And while we have different theories or hypotheses over the years, like it's sulfate, it is black carbon, it's heavy toxic metals, is it ultrafine particles, always we get the most robust predictor to be PM2.5 mass. And that's what we use for the national ambient air quality standards. About 5 years ago, we wanted to test the hypothesis that particles are toxic because they carry radionuclides, which emit alpha radiation. And because of that, alpha radiation causes, in addition, to DNA damage, of course, causes inflammation and oxidative stress. So we just started with this hypothesis. We had no idea where we were going to end up. And I will just go through some of the studies we have done today, and all of them are 3 to 4 years old. So we, in this process, we discovered that environmental radiation actually it's a serious issue and has been understudied. And we have studied solar and terrestrial radiation, and we have studied the direct effects of the solar, like UV skin cancer or radon skin cancer, for instance, or lung cancer. But what we found is that solar and terrestrial radiation can affect air pollution, or they can modify the effects of air pollution. And maybe in the future, I can come and talk to you about the solar radiation. Today, we will focus on the terrestrial radiation. And you know that much of the ionizing radiation we receive per year is due to inhaling radon or particles that they carry radionuclide, progeny from radon. To a less extent by ingestion. And we also receive external cosmic and terrestrial radiation. But the main thrust of the exposure we receive is through inhalation. So today I will talk about radon, and I will try to introduce a new terminology, which is particle radioactivity. It's just the way we say particle sulfate, particle nitrate, particle elements. We also will call particle alpha gross activity, particle beta gross activity, or particle gamma activity. And you will see here that particle radioactivity is mostly associated with radon. And also you will see that particle radioactivity can have direct, and radon can have direct effects on humans, or they can modify the effects of air pollution and particles specifically. So I know you have many experts there, but basically radon is a gas, decays, has a half-life of 3.8 days, produces an alpha particle, and then goes through different transitions to alpha and beta and gamma emitting short-lived progeny until it gets to lead-210, which has a half-life of 22 years, and then again decays to alpha and beta emitting progeny. Our hypothesis is that ultrafine particles, that they are radionuclides, they attach to particles, they go to the lungs, and the difference here is that in the past, radon was considered as a lung cancer risk, and the deposition onto the lungs was a very important issue, and the dosimetry and differentiating ultrafine, like unattached and attached particles, was very important. In our case, we believe that radon is not just a carcinogen. Radon does not, and I'm sorry, particles carrying radionuclides do not stay just in the lungs, but penetrate through the epithelium, and they become systemic and go at different parts of the human body, as I will show you. The particles emit alpha, beta, and gamma radiation. Alpha radiation is a big alpha is a helium without 2 electrons. It's very big and has what we call high linear energy transfer. In other words, the radiation does not travel, but goes to the vicinity, to adjacent cells, and they attack or reacts with the cells and can cause ROS or DNA damage. So that's the reason we believe that alpha is the culprit. Unfortunately, we don't have many alpha measurements. Therefore, we use beta radiation from the radon network and radon exposures as surrogates of exposures to PM 2.5 alpha activity. And as you know, alpha does not penetrate the paper. The only way we can get exposed to alpha is through inhalation and ingestion, whereas gamma radiation can go through the human body. And as I said, we believe alpha is the most toxic. We will make, in terms of the exposure, we will make a distinction. We have radon exposures. We have exposures to radiation from short-lived radionuclides, and we have exposures from the long-lived radionuclides. If you measure radon, for instance, in your basement, you don't really measure the radon gas, but you measure the alpha, which is produced by the radon gas, and that is usually in becquerels per cubic meter or picocuries per liter. When we measure the radiation from the freshly collected particles, again, that's on the order of becquerels per cubic meter, and the ratio between the short and radon is something less than 1, can be 0.7, 0.6. I will use the expression that the freshly collected particles are radioactive, okay, and they are hot. When you leave the particle filter for a few days, they decay and they emit radiation for many years, and this we call long-lived radiation, and the levels are at the millibecquerel per cubic meter, okay? So fast decaying, high exposure, slowly decaying, lower exposures, but for a longer period. So I talked about the particle radioactivity that we have developed. And let's talk about exposure. To do health effect studies, you need exposure. And unfortunately, not good radon exposure data and not good particle radioactivity data. So we had to start from scratch. So you know very well that the data we use come from the 80s, data from EPA, and then transformed using Bayesian models by the Lawrence Berkeley Laboratory. The problem is that we have one measurement per county, and we do not have temporal variability. So we have 3,000 counties in the United States, and we have 3,000 estimates that people have used for for epidemiology. Unfortunately, if you want to publish an epidemiology, the spatial resolution is very coarse, and the temporal resolution does not exist. And I give you an example. Here is Eastern Massachusetts and Southeast New England. We have the counties, and you can see the uranium in the soil, which is a precursor of radon, that there is a coarse, okay, pattern as compared to the uranium in the zip code. So definitely you see that by using county, we really introduce a lot of exposure error. So what we did, we approached many companies in the United States, and they do measurements of radon as part of transactions. Right now, we have about 4 million measurements. The companies have been very, very cooperative and helpful. They understand the importance of this. We have developed predictors, like including meteorology, uranium in the soil, gamma radiation from the soil, housing characteristics, et cetera, and we have been able to develop zip codes. We developed monthly means of radon by zip code in the United States between early 2000 to 2018. And so far, we have available data for 22 states in the Northeast and Midwest, and we'll be happy to share this data with people that they wish to have. And this is the model. You see on the left is the basement, and on the right above the level. And what you see here, you see that we have a very high spatial resolution, temporal resolution. You can see that the concentrations change. The winter we have higher resolution, higher concentrations. The summer we have lower concentrations. I don't know if my movie plays. It should play, but I don't see. I don't know why. Okay, now yeah, you can see that now. So in principle, we don't really expect long-term trends, but in reality, they are happening. They can happen because people mitigate homes that would decrease exposures. And also it can happen because homes are bigger basements. And also they are getting tighter because of energy savings. So we expect and we see exposures to vary by year, and of course season. Then we wanted to do some retrospective studies. And if you take a filter which is 20 years old, there is still radiation that comes out. So we took filters from Boston, collected 10, 20 years ago. And if you measure today the alpha and beta radiation that comes from off the filter, and you know when the samples were collected, and you assume that the decay, that the production of the radiation today is related to the decay of lead-210, which has a half-life of 22 plus years, you can estimate the long-lived radiation of the filters few days after the collection. Few days, you know, the beginning, 3-4 days, you lose all short-lived radionuclides, and then that day, we can estimate what was the concentration. And this is very nice because we can do all sorts of studies, not just for Boston, but for any filters we have. And here we had, the nice thing in this study was that we had both PM10 filters and PM2.5 filters. And we found that for the alpha activities, the slope between PM2.5 alpha activity and PM10 alpha activity was 1. So this is an indication that particle alpha gross activity is associated with PM2.5. This is not surprising because PM2.5 has the accumulation mode where the ultrafine radionuclides accumulate. And also we know PM10 is less toxic than PM2.5. And of course, our hypothesis is that PM2.5 is more toxic because it's more radioactive. Then we wanted to do national studies to do epidemiology of long-lived beta radioactivity. And you know, in the United States, we have the radiation network. Unfortunately, EPA has lost interest in funding, and the last 4 or 5 years really has deteriorated. But before this radiation network started in the 50s, the purpose was to track nuclear weapon tests, exposures, nuclear power plant accidents, and terrorist attacks. And they collect on TSP, total suspended particles. They let the filters cool down, and then in 2 weeks, they measure the beta activity. We have this data, and then we took the data, and we collected data on radon, uranium, and on meteorology, power plants, fracking areas, special trends, temporal trends, and all that stuff. And then we use about 9, if I remember, machine learning models that we trained. And then we took the ensemble and we predicted PM beta gross activity in a spatial resolution of 30 by 32 kilometers and the temporal resolution of 1 month. And here's what you get if you, these are representative maps of 2006. I cannot see from here now if it's 2006 or 2010. And let me see, because, yeah, 2004, 2010, and 2016. The first thing you can see that during the winter, PM beta gross activity is higher because of the boundary layer is lower and the radon is higher. And also you can see that particle radioactivity levels have gone down. The reason is that they have gone down is not because of the radon, because the radon is natural. It does not really change from time by years, unless we believe that climate change makes some differences. But the reason is that PM concentrations were reduced in the United States over the last 20 years. This is the overall national trend. We did the analysis, we just submitted this paper. We found that we have an average 2.5% decrease per year. And then the trends for beta activity, they're about half or maybe 40% of that. If you take the ratio of radioactivity over mass expressed in becquerels per microgram of PM2.5, you see actually that the particles become more radioactive with the time passing. And I don't have the time, but the two important messages we draw here is that improving air quality reduces particle radioactivity. It does not really, you don't get 100% benefit, but you get a 40% benefit. And the more the particles go near zero, the more they become radioactive. And this might explain why we don't have a threshold for PM effects. And also we find that at the lower levels, the exposure response gets sharper. So one of the reasons is that because at lower levels, particles are more radioactive. And you can see this here. This is the gross beta ratio over PM 2.5 at less than 3 micrograms particles, 3 to 0.6 micrograms per cubic meter, 6 to 9, etc. And you can see that when you go below the national air quality standard of 12, the particle radioactivity ratio increases. As I said at the beginning, the fresh filters are on the becquerel per cubic meter, and the old filters are on millibecquerel per cubic meter. So we do need to measure fresh particles. We cannot wait until we take them to the laboratory and do whatever. So we have developed a machine which called particle alpha radioactivity sampler, PARS. It's a filter that collects PM 2.5, has a small chamber, a scintillation cell above, and the Geiger counter. And it's a very precise method. We get a very good collocation between two samplers. And let's say you collect particles and you stop sampling, and then you take the log of the initial, the radiation at different time intervals over the initial. And as you say, that is equivalent to decay rate. And from here, we find that the particles we collect, they are decaying, and the half-life is on the order of 20 to 40 minutes, which suggests that the alpha radioactivity we find in the atmosphere under, in the usual typical conditions is mostly related to radon decay. And this is PARS measuring in a basement with very high radon levels. We see particles to be around 250 becquerels per cubic meter. That's quite high levels. We see in the winter here the particles to be high in the living room, and outdoors we have levels which are on the order of 10 to 20 becquerels per cubic meter. People are not very familiar with concentrations of particles, but this is quite high concentrations. A nice thing with particle radioactivity is that you can really do dosimetry and you can have biomarkers. If we inhale sulfate, we'll never see that in our body. Elements, yes, but we eat many other things that they have elements. So it's really hard to do the type of measurements we do if we have radionuclides. And this is the study we did about 2 years ago. We took cadavers from Brazil. We do not bring them here because we cannot, but they measured the polonium-210 in their brain, in the lungs. And what they found that the lungs, the concentration was 2.3 becquerels per dry mass, kilogram of dry mass. But you can see here the olfactory bulb and the olfactory epithelium, the little thing that takes ultrafine particles from the nose to the brain, they had high concentrations. And a couple of things here. The first is that the brain really does not communicate or exchange fluids with the rest of the body. There is some through the blood barrier. And actually, one of the few ways to really get to the brain is through the olfactory epithelium these ultrafine particles that they carry radionuclides, they go to the olfactory bulb. That's the one conclusion here. The second is that lungs, they have lower concentrations because we have a clearance mechanism. Third, actually, there are more points, is that we found higher concentrations in smokers because we know smokers are exposed to polonium and radon decay products. It's important for those who want to do kind calculations, approximately 3.6 alpha particles per gram per hour of brain are decayed. And this is a lot. If you live 60, 80 years, you have all this radiation decaying. Alpha particles are very energetic and they have high energy. And we are starting, I'm not going to show these studies here, we're starting relating dementia to radon exposures. There is a paper, old, not by us, but others in the past about Alzheimer's and radon exposures. So we do believe that having radionuclides in your brain decaying for many years is not a good thing for people. And I think more studies that will come up. We also measured polonium-210 in placenta, dry placenta. The blue is the side of the baby, and the red the side of the mother. The placenta is supposed to protect the baby, but as you can see here, this does not happen. Polonium-210 is one of the most toxic substances. If you remember this Russian spy who was poisoned by Putin in London, they fed him with polonium, and it was a very, very small amount that they put in the tea. And this person died slowly. And actually, there is a nice case study in Lancet where they describe all these failures. And it's not something which happens immediately. It's a slow poisoning where they find inflammation, oxidation, organ failure. They had hard time to see where the radioactivity was in the body because it was not localized, but because polonium is lipophilic and also moves through liquids. So it's something that really is very compatible with the human body. When we have a nuclear war or a nuclear accident, we don't have polonium, which is alpha emitting. The only alpha emitting radionuclide we have from nuclear bombs is plutonium, which has 25,000 years of decay. And actually, the alpha emissions, emissions in your body from plutonium, unless are excessively high concentrations, is less than what we get from polonium. So polonium is very important. I'll spend the next half of my presentations about health studies. I'm sorry I go too fast, but I have too many slides that I want to share because I think this is fresh literature and emerging literature that it would be nice for people to know. You remember I said we thought about this whole area by starting and hypothesizing that PM2.5 is toxic because of radioactivity. Well, the first thing we did, this was the earliest paper we wrote in 2018. We took all these dots where we had mortality estimated, PM mortality per microgram per cubic meter using Poisson regression analysis, time series analysis. And we had 120 cities. We had mortality effects, one per season, so almost 500 points. And then we did a meta-regression where we tried to control for poverty, for green space, altitude, et cetera, plus the county radon that we got from the Berkeley data. Back then, we did not have the radon model we have developed. And what we found that in locations with where the radon goes below the 10th percentile, 0.6 picocuries per liter, these basements, the mortality was about 1.95% per 10 micrograms per cubic meter of PM2.5. But if you go to areas which are above 90% radon, you can see that the mortality increases to 3.69. So this was kind of the first indication that special heterogeneity in particle mortality to some extent might depend on particle radioactivity. And then we say, okay, maybe we can do mortality studies or using just radon data. Again, we use the Berkeley data, very coarse resolution in the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast. These are Medicare data for over 42 million person years. And we did survival analysis as compared to the time series analysis we did in the previous. We published this 3 years ago. And what we found that mortality for all data, I think this was non-accidental, they was about 0.61, COPD, MI, and stroke. These are about twice the mortality we see from PM2.5. And also we found a mortality that we typically don't find for PM2.5 for diabetics. And all these models we control for PM2.5. So this mortality is above and beyond what a PM2.5 mortality we have. And actually, in this study was not that much significant. So now we have the spatial temporal model for particle beta gross activity. So we downscale that model from 32 by 32, and we estimate zip code beta activity. We also have zip code PM2.5 annual means because these are chronic effects. And we did a large study which was published 4 weeks ago by the Journal of American Heart Association, where we found that for over almost 750,000 accidental deaths, non-accidental deaths in Massachusetts between 2001 and 2015, we assigned concentrations, exposures by zip code and month and year for radon and beta. We use difference of difference, which actually is a good method to reduce confounding, and also we use generalized mixed models. So we found many different results, but the one I want to stress is that we estimated PM2.5 mortality at low particle radioactivity, medium particle radioactivity, and high particle radioactivity, below 10 percentile of particle radioactivity, 50 percentile, and 90 percentile. These are cardiovascular disease mortality, myocardial infarction, stroke, and all non-accidental, all-cause non-accidental mortality. What you see here, you see that the mortality of particles, PM2.5, are much stronger when they carry radioactivity. Again, these are filters measured many years ago. There is much less radioactivity, but it's chronic. You know, this is what we're exposed chronically, right? So it's a good representation of the chronic effects. So evidence that particle radioactivity modifies the effects of PM 2.5 mortality. So I will change gears now and discuss a little bit about, talk about the studies, the panel and cohort studies we have. This is very opportunistic, right? Because we have done all these studies over the years for PM and for other pollutants, and now we develop exposure models so we can do the same epidemiology as before. So this is the CICAS, which is the study or inter-city asthma. I don't know if I remember the acronym, but basically these are children, mostly minority Black and Hispanic, between 8 and 15 years, we had this, the first thing we do is a survey, right? So we go and see which kids are asthmatic and we include them in the study. The rate is quite high, over 25%. And then we linked the prevalence incidence of asthma to the zip code concentration, very, gross estimate. And we found that the radon exposure was associated with asthma diagnosis, and both short and long-term exposures to radon showed associations, and also we found associations with odds of school absentees. So this is this paper is in Press, I think, Respiratory Pediatrics, And then we have another paper which is submitted where we linked asthma again, asthma morbidity symptoms. And this is based on a 14-day questionnaire before we have the examinations. And again, we found here association with asthma symptoms and exposures to zip code radon. And if I remember well, yes, this was 1 month moving average and 2 months moving average before the collection of the data. Perinatal outcomes, 2 studies based on a large Massachusetts registry of almost 1 million pregnant women between 2000 up to 2016. We published a paper, Stoughton, about gestational diabetes, and which is a serious problem in pregnant women. And you can see associations between this is hold on a second, I'm sorry. This is particle radioactivity, yes. And first semester, second semester, third trimester, I mean. And we have strong associations. The odds numbers are here. And we did the same thing for PM2.5, and we did not find effects. Also, we saw if PM2.5 modifies the effects of particle radioactivity, and we did not find an indication. We also did gestational hypertension that we published in Environmental International, the same Massachusetts registry. Here we used radon, and we used county mean, county median, the Berkeley model, and also we used the zip code model we have developed. And we found that pregnancy is associated with higher odds of gestational hypertension, radon, I'm sorry, exposure during pregnancy. So again, the only thing you can see here is that the things become more tight when you have better spatial resolution. So this is another indication that radon or particle radioactivity really can cause problems. So because I don't have time, I will just tell you that there are many papers I will be happy to share with you. This is the paper I just presented, but also we have found oxidative stress and inflammation. Also, we have found in 2 cohorts, the Framingham study and the normative and the COPD study and the normative aging study. So there is replication across cohorts. Blood pressure in the normative aging study, hemoglobin concentration. We know that there are associations between radiation and hemoglobin from previous studies. We had a paper in circulation about ventricular arrhythmias and exposures to particle radioactivity, lung function in the normative aging study, and exposure to PM beta cross activity. Another paper from the which showed that PM gamma gross activity is also associated with COPD, lung function in the COPD cohort, and renal function, et cetera, et cetera. So definitely we have used existing tools and data, and with very little support. One of my frustrations for this is that nobody really cares much. And I know this is good. When you tell people something and they don't want to listen or they push back, that means you are doing something good. I do expect in a few years that this is going to be a big issue. It will probably come from the Congress to EPA to NIHS, and this is gonna because I think the risks are quite high, and so we have published over 40 papers in cohort and population studies. We have developed techniques for archived and fresh filters to measure radioactivity. We have developed national models for beta radioactivity, and we are happy to work with private companies that they can give us data. We have done 22 states, and we hope to do more. We'll be happy to collaborate with you and whoever wants to our data, our expertise. We want other people to generate this research because I think it will be more convincing. So we look forward to any type of collaborations that they might rise. The radon, what we learn, radon is not just an indoor pollutant. We get exposures from outdoors. Indoor radon is about 10 times higher than outdoor radon, but personal exposure to particle radioactivity is only by a factor of 3 times less. So for places where radon is low inside the homes, ambient exposure to radionuclides is the dominant pathway. We saw that if we improve air quality, exposures to particle radioactivity will reduce. And also we saw that there is particle radioactivity and PM interactions. And the last thing I want to say is that we did not have good epidemiology so far to date. And the different papers published here and there are from not very good radon data, and that's the reason they have not made a big impact. But I think the suggestion and the suspicion that radon is very important exists. It's just we do not have the chance to do the good population epidemiological studies because of the lack of radon data and particle radioactivity. Now we have. I just did a preliminary analysis a week ago and found strong associations with brain tumors and leukemia in children. So I think as we get these new metrics, I think we'll do more epidemiology. CDC collects data, the same data we are collecting, CDC collects, but what they do, they just tabulate. What we do in our models, we use all sorts of predictors other than just the radon measurements, and we use spatial temporal models. So there is more sophistication, there is more interpolation, et cetera, et cetera. So this is not just my work. Over 100 people have been involved in these studies, and the work could not be done without their participation. And I think that concludes. I put too much stuff in 45 minutes, which will allow us 5, 10, or 15 minutes of questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Petros. Awesome. Wow. I've been doing radon research for a long time, and a lot of what you said, I had no idea. I had no idea about. So thank you very, very much. We do have some questions in the chat, and you know, the work that we do in Kentucky is we work closely with our geologists. So we have mapped our state a little differently than the rest of the country. And so not only do we link the real-time, you know, radon values from the 2 of the companies, and that was one of my questions for you. We work with AirCheck and Alpha Energy, and we get data from them, and we have about almost 90,000 values right now just in Kentucky. that then we map looking at the bedrock. So Dr. Hanneberg has a question in the chat. He's my primary collaborator and the state geologist. And
Great.
Bill, instead of reading it, would you like to ask your question about the maps that he showed?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
So when you showed the maps of the northern tier states, the sort of yellowish to orange maps, a couple of things I noticed, and especially in Ohio, because I'm from there and was familiar with it, it looked like there were hotspots around Columbus and maybe Chillicothe and I can't remember, maybe Cincinnati. And also you didn't see much of a correspondence between the radon results and the bedrock geologic map of Ohio. There was maybe some if I look pretty hard. So I get the two questions are, what kind, or did you do any spatial declustering on your analysis to take away the influence of having so many values in the cities? And also, have you thought about looking at ways to include the bedrock geology as another spatial variable in your model?
Yeah, I think we use uranium and we use also the gamma readings. But I think the more data we have, I think the more the model will be accurate. And one thing I can say, since you brought this in terms of where we see clusters, we're near power plants, because power plants are predictors. And also, I didn't want to talk about this, but maybe you prompted me. So we see fracking impacts on radon, indoor radon, believe it or not. And we took information. We have a very nice model that shows fracking wells and activities and windroses. And basically, we use an exposure metric, which is not just distance from fracking areas, but also the wind. So we integrate only, and so we measure exposures during when the house is downwind and upwind, and it's a sum of 1 over the distance. And when we do this, we had about 30,000+ samples in Pennsylvania. We regress on the downwind and upwind exposures plus time and variables. And what we found that the downwind is a predictor. The upwind also is a predictor, but when you control for both, the downwind is a predictor, and which indicates that probably this is done by air pollution, because if it was not different, that probably would be water pollution. And this is the levels, the excess of radon in the basements of homes. As for if you have 10 wells, 50 wells, or 100 wells, and this is the distance, and you can see if you are very close, you can have significant radon levels. So in our model, we include fracking as well as a predictor. I don't know how much that would really explain the patterns you are discussing, but we'll be happy to collaborate and include any sorts of additional data. The only problem would be that certain areas will have more data than others, which might mean that the exposure error might be differential. So what we can be done is that we can run the models for the data you have just for your region, and then you can use those data the way you like.
Thank you, Petros. Thank you. I have a clarification question about the 4 million. You mentioned you had 4 million values that you got from the companies. Just to clarify, are those the results from the charcoal-based test kits that are done indoors in this country, or are they from? Is it something else?
Yeah, I think there are 3 types of data. I think most of them is the charcoal or the One was like 90% of the data were from charcoal. So, and most of the data are short measurements.
Yeah.
And also we wrote a paper, which I did not present, about relationships between short and long term. Now, I know for the cancer people, they like to do the long-term exposures, right? For cardiovascular and acute effects, we care about short-term exposures. So, so basically what we do, instead of the way we estimate long-term exposures is by averaging monthly predictions rather than just having a 365 measurements.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Natalie, it's so good to see your name popped up. If you want to turn your camera on, feel free. But Natalie did have a question specifically, I think, related to indoor level residential radon kits to measure radon, but also had a question about the way, I guess, that you're analyzing your PM beta particle PM 2.5 ratio. So I'm screwing up your question. So please, Natalie, just ask.
Well, thanks so much for a great talk. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
I was wondering from your perspective, why haven't more epidemiology studies been using indoor residential radon kits in epi studies? Like what's preventing us from doing this? It seems like they're inexpensive. Why haven't we used them in like bigger epi studies?
Yeah, I think, unfortunately, we all do what NIHS and EPA ask us to do. They give us money, and we're very expensive consultants. So if there was an RFA to do epidemiology of radon, probably I'm sure they would do the studies. The second is that now the golden standard of epidemiology is to do national-wide studies with many people, which we cannot measure. So that has been a limitation. The other thing is that we don't really have networks that measure radon. Most of these measurements are done by companies. So I think we're stumbling because we don't have a good exposure data. Also, we could use the kits, as you said, in small panel studies, right? But we have not done that because I think everybody believes that radon is just a cancer risk, and you need many years of exposure. And so you don't really go out and put 20 years, a radon kit unless. So I think it's funding. We believe it's a cancer, it's nothing else, which is wrong. And the third is the lack of good exposure data. I think because we know statistics, we know we have data, we have everything, it's not going to take 40 years as it took with PM. I think it will take 10 years to learn everything about radon. So it's just a question of enhancing exposure.
Okay, great. My second question, I was really intrigued by the ratio measure, the PM to PM 2.5 ratio. And in your more recent studies, did you all look at that ratio to see if it was even more strongly associated with these health outcomes than just each on their own? I know they got a similar question, but it was...
Yeah, I think that's a very good idea to do, and we could do that. We just wrote this paper. This is like just submitted, but I think it's an excellent point, an excellent idea. We can do mortality and see how the ratio modifies. That would be, yes, I think it's a good idea. We have not done that, but we just fresh data analysis, but it can be done.
Well, thank you so much. This was really...
You're welcome, Natalie. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We do have one more question from Rick Kakashi in the chat, and it has to do with the isotope decay series that you presented. Rick, do you want to ask your question, or shall I just read it? Go ahead.
Sure, I can ask it. It might be easier. Yeah. So, you're doing in the decay series chart, right? It seems like you're trying to capture radon and its immediate progeny radiation. That's
in the short measure,
right
yeah,
away,
in the short, yeah.
So what is the limitation of instead waiting a week or something like that, and just measuring the decay from lead-210, because that's a 22-year half-life. It's accumulating all the radon into lead-210, and that's a beta decay, and you could measure it. Is that a detection limit problem? Because all that radon, which is 4 days half-life, is accumulating into 22-year half-life lead. So why is lead-210 not used?
That's what we use for the. I'm not sure if I understand the question.
Well, I'm saying as a surrogate for radon, because
Yeah.
the radon.
Why we cannot use? Yeah, we could. Yeah. I see what you mean. So not only go where. Yeah, that's a good.
Why try to capture that fleeting? Try to get the samples to measure it right away. Deliberately wait 2 or 3 weeks and then measure the lead-210, because it's all accumulated to lead-210.
Yeah, but these filters. So don't have the real time. Measurements. Just wait.
Or am I missing something analytically here?
No. Well, there are a couple of. The beta is very weak, so you don't have the sensitivity you have.
All right.
Okay. And also you want to see the hourly variability that you cannot see with integrated filter. Okay.
Although in terms of sensitivity, though, I would think that all that radon is accumulating in the lead-210. So even though the
but also you can have
weak, it might be better. No, it doesn't work.
Because it will be more. Also, you can have some other negative, other beta radiation from other sources.
Interference, I see.
Yes, soil, and also we see some beta radiation from cosmic, maybe beryllium.
Too much background, you're saying? Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, that would be a good reason. So I had the reverse question in your Brazil study. You chose polonium-210, but again, why not choose lead-210? Polonium-210 is a half-life of 138 days, but looking at cadavers, a lot of that polonium has already disappeared by the time you're looking at it.
The sensitivity, we did both. The sensitivity, was
again. Okay, just wondering.
And by the way, I'm not a radiation guy, so I'm learning. I'm somebody who is learning, but. So these are good questions, and I think we're taking into consideration. But yes, in general, lead-210 has some problems with the detection.
Mostly background, huh? Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. We just want to remind people to please click on the survey and give us feedback about today's talk. It was very interesting. Does anyone else? I don't see anything else in the chat, but feel free to. Turn on your camera so we can see you. And does anyone, I know we have quite a few people from our indoor radon program at the State Health Department who are on. And so or if there are other questions, please, I see Clay's turning his camera on. Do you have a question? Okay. All right. I guess I'll ask a question because, and it goes back to geology. So in our state, we have chosen to work closely with Bill and Drew, who are on the meeting today, who are state geologists. And I'm a nurse, so I don't know anything about rock or soil, but they've taught me a lot. And the reason that we started working with a geologist is really, as a public health nurse, is really to try to determine where in our state we're have the highest radon risk potential, so we could do some interventions with them to get more people to test and get people to mitigate and all that. So I guess my question is, have you thought of working with geologists and taking into account the underlying bedrock, as a way to put in your spatial temporal model? Or because I noticed you're looking at atmospheric conditions and weather, which we
soil composition, uranium in the soil. And there is also another parameter which is called radon potential.
Yes.
Which is a special parameter. So we include that. I don't know. Maybe the geologists can tell us if there is more than just uranium we are using that we could use as a predictor. I don't know. And if these data are available nationally, maybe somebody can enlighten us.
Bill, I see you turned off your cam, or do you want to say something?
Yeah, I'll turn on my camera.
Yeah.
So, Yeah, it's really an interesting problem in the northern tier of states. It's more complicated because you have the bedrock, and then you have glacial deposits over them, many of which were brought down from carried rocks from Canada that could be high in radon. But the other thing we've noticed in Kentucky is a limestone paradox, that the bedrock with the highest radon potential in Kentucky, the two formations are limestone in both of those. And in one particular, the highest unit is very low in actual uranium. So the question is, how do you have rock that's low in uranium yet have high radon? So we're looking at things like the possibility that that particular limestone is the same limestone that Mammoth Cave is developed in.
I see.
In that the radon could be brought in through flooding of subterranean passages and left as oxidized deposits on the walls of caves, basically, which wouldn't show up in a lot of national maps. So I think there are a lot of geologic details, and in general, you think, yeah, that if there's uranium in the rock and the soil, you should have high radon. But we're finding, as we look more closely, there are more and more exceptions and complications and things we never expected to see.
Thank you.
That's amazing. How difficult is to do this mapping? I mean, are we talking about if we want to do a large region, is that something like it will take years and money, or is something that?
No, if you have the spatial data, the other thing we did is you would need the geological maps of the area. And once you have those two pieces of information, it's a pretty straightforward GIS project. You just segregate the radon values by the kind of geologic map, or you could do the same thing with a soil map if you had soil maps, and basically just look at the radon values as a function of whether it's in soil developed above limestone or soil developed above sandstone or shale. And you could conceivably do the same thing with different units that are mapped on soil survey maps, which are also pretty easily available. So it's sort of, if you have all that data, it's a pretty straightforward GIS exercise.
So I just want to thank everyone for coming. You don't have to hop off. We can keep talking, but I just wanted to tell you that we appreciate your coming. Thank you for filling out the survey. I hope you'll come next time and in December, and come to our State of the Center Science meeting, December 12th. Thank you. Anyway, we can stay on and talk if you want. I just wanted to make sure people knew that they could hop off.
Yeah.
Anyway, Petros, we would be happy to, set up another time to talk.
Yes, absolutely. I would love to connect with you.
I am going to read some of your papers because I was particle radioactivity. I do a lot of particulate matter measurement in the tobacco world because I started out on tobacco exposure and kind of moved into radon. And I've always known that there's this stickiness or attraction between particles and radon, but the way you talk about it and the way you're measuring particle radioactivity, I need to understand it better. So I think we'll set up something after this to talk.
And Ellen, one point to make, the patterns, the spatial patterns of particle radioactivity are very different than the radon, because the particle formation and decay, it moves up in the air. So, and you can be downwind a high radon and be exposed. So if you go the radon, it's more localized based on, the composition of the soil. But then the particle radioactivity becomes something between radon and air pollution. So exposure assessment is very different for the two of them. Right.
And so I need to understand that better. And I feel like, I've been doing this for so many years, I thought I kind of understood it. And after I listened to you, I'm like, ooh, I got some work to do. So
great, I'm sure.
Thank you so much. We appreciate you. And we will talk again. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.